Hi, everyone. Rachel Boucher, head of content at Event Marketer here with our partners from the Experiential Marketing Measurement Coalition, also known as the EMMC. They've been helping us discuss and share insights around measurement across the industry. And as we like to say, everyone in this industry wrestles with event measurement, yet there couldn't be a more important part of event strategy. And at Event Marketer, we believe that strong event measurement practices are the key to industry growth. And it's one of the reasons why we've been so happy to be working with the EMMC to have important conversations and to share amazing resources the coalition is developing with the wider event community. And today we're diving into measurement guidance for event organizers for events that offer an expo floor or sponsorship component. It's a nuanced challenge and environment where there needs to be mutually beneficial value, objectives, data strategy, and analysis. Feel free to pop your comments or questions into the chat as we go along. We'd love to hear from you. And I'm pleased to have joining the conversation today Whitney Brockman, Vice President of Sponsorship Sales at NAVC, the North American Veterinary Community, which puts on the VMX Veterinary Conference. Our editors have had the pleasure of reporting from its show floor. Whitney, thank you so much for joining us.
You're
And
welcome. Happy to be here.
great. And we have Dax Kellner, Board President of the Experiential Marketing Measurement Coalition. Hey, Dax.
Hey,
And Dax, I'd actually love for you to kick us off and talk about why this is such an interesting area of measurement to think about and to tackle. Like, what's been on your minds as far as this audience and measurement?
yeah, definitely. So, first of all, just to know a little bit more about the EMMC. Essentially, it's a not-for-profit association, and our only objective is to help grow the industry through better measurement. And we're not selling anything except for ideas and strategies and approaches. And so we often think deeply about measurement for events. And more recently, I think looking at specific types of events and thinking about what are the nuances and distinctions that are relevant to those event types. And so this is one that has cropped up. And for a lot of us who work in B2B, but even B2C, there are events that have a sponsorship component, sponsors, exhibitors, brands that activate at a consumer event, whatever it may be. It adds an additional element of complexity to the measurement picture. And the way that we're thinking about it is what we're calling a mutual value equation. What that means is, as the organizer of an event, obviously there are goals and objectives. Presumably, you want the event to make money. Obviously, that's one. Maybe there's a brand reputation around the event. There's growth opportunities. There's loads of things you can be thinking about as an organizer. But those things can't come at the deficit, or they can't be a penalty to the other groups. Otherwise, it's all not going to work. You need mutual value. And so the second cohort or second area is, of course, sponsors and exhibitors. And most organizer events that have sponsors and exhibitors may be selling them. Not always. Sometimes a sponsor can be there as a partner and be there for free or offering something else in exchange for their presence. But there is a value exchange regardless. And so they're investing their time, their resources, maybe their money to be at the event, and they need to get value out of it. We'll talk later, I guess, about what value looks like for each. And then finally, and obviously, the attendees have got to get value out of it. And if any one of those cohorts doesn't get value, it's kind of all falls apart. This is the added complexity and why organizers have it really tough when they're doing events that have an expo element or a sponsorship element to that. So that's kind of why we said, all right, we better think about this specific type of event because it has this nuance that is different from other types of events.
It's a great topic. And I know the EMMC has some new guidance coming out for its members next week. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But Whitney, I'd love for you to tell us about your attendee base, both the exhibitors and the attendees, and set up who they are and how your event serves them.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are a veterinary based organizer. We have an event for about 27,000 attendees who will attend our event each year. So we're based in Orlando, Florida, every year in January. Of those 27,000 attendees, about 20,000 of them are veterinary professionals specifically working in hospitals. So we have an international audience, mostly from the US, veterinarians, technicians, practice managers, and hospital support staff. And that is our main attendee audience for the product that we're offering, which is continuing education. We have about 1,300 hours of available education during the event. On the other side of things, we have a large expo hall. So over 700 companies exhibit with us. And of those 700 companies, they send about 5,000 professionals who will help support those booths inside the expo hall. And these are companies that have new products launching, new services, new research. We have startups who are represented there. And we consider all of these audiences part of our customer base. So it's a fine balance. And as Dax said, we have to be able to offer that value to each of those audiences, but in a very balanced way, which we try to do at the NABC. So hopefully that answers your question as to who we're serving. But our main focus for the event is to make sure that the entire veterinary healthcare team thrives. And so we are offering that continuing education throughout the week. And we do rely on sponsors and exhibitors to help us fund this event to help keep the cost to attending the event at a minimum.
Can I ask a question to follow up? Because your situation is even more challenging, maybe than some, because of the primarily educational focus for the audience. And so that means, and I've worked in other healthcare and medical areas. That means that the expo hall for them is not a priority necessarily. They're not coming to the event with a shopping mindset, one may say. So, what do you think the value is for your attendees of visiting the expo hall?
So that's a really good question. So you're right. The attendee is there to consume continuing education, and that's where we find most of their time. However, over the years, we have been able to set up an expo hall that is an exciting place to be. We have a lot of activations. We have a puppy playground, a catnap cafe. We have a lot of carrots that help get our audience into the expo hall because of can't miss activations that are sponsored. So they're in the hall for the excitement, but they're also there to learn, and they understand that they have an opportunity in one space to learn about new products, new services, new research that will be launching. And the education is great. And a lot of our sponsors do support educational opportunities too. And I can get into some of that as far as how we fine tuned the rules, so to speak, for sponsored education. But they tend to have a lot of activation at their booth around the products that they're launching or the new research or some of the scientific programs that they're supporting in the program. So a lot of our audience will go to the sessions and then they will make time to go into the expo hall to meet with the company representatives to learn more. So that's kind of how we see a lot of traffic in our expo hall because attendees want to learn more. They want to consume as much information as possible and take home tangible learnings back to their practices, which a lot of that does happen in the expo hall. We also
That's
have
great.
continuing education in there as well. We have 4 learning theaters, a professional development center, an expo classroom, and then this year, a champion care center where attendees can go also to continuing education in the expo hall. So we're getting them in there. And once they're in
That's
there, they
nice.
don't leave.
That's great.
Yeah,
I'd like to start with uh Whitney, the show itself, and your objectives and how you organize them in a way that satisfies the exhibitors and the attendees. What is that planning process like for you all? Where do you start? Because I do think it kind of starts with what you need first, but then how that impacts everybody else. And so what does that process look like for you all?
sure. So it starts almost immediately after we end the event. We typically will meet with our top partners. We have about 20 to 25 partner level sponsors that support the majority of our activations and educational programs. And we like to meet with them as soon as possible because it's fresh on their minds. They can give us their feedback, what worked well, what do they want to continue doing? Do they want to change anything up for the next year? Do they anticipate any major strategy changes? So we like to get ahead of things really early on so that we can start developing our objectives and our program around what their goals and strategies are. But we also gather feedback from our attendees and we take a lot of that feedback to heart. And so do our sponsors, because the last thing our companies want to do is to sponsor or come across in a way that is unappeasing to our audience. So if we find an underlying theme or a common thread in our attendee survey data, we will take that back to our sponsors. We'll make adjustments to sponsorships and educational program guidelines to make sure that that audience is not annoyed. We also tend to look at that feedback for major changes. And an example that I can give you is bag inserts. We used to sell a ton of bag inserts that went into the attendee bag, and we made a lot of money selling bag inserts. However, the bag inserts were something that our audience, specifically in the veterinary field, they care about the environment, they care about sustainability, and they were watching people literally dump out their bags into trash cans or piles of paper sitting around the concourse. And so we took that feedback, came up with some ideas, and we were able to launch a new opportunity last year. We're repeating it this year where we were able to recoup the revenue, keep it whole, but it resulted in no paper. We were not stuffing any inserts into any bags this year, and it was great. Everybody was really happy with it. So
I
those
love
one
that
example
too.
will probably change an objective.
I refuse to take any paper or generally any swag at events because I work in events and so I get so much
Mhm.
crap that I don't want today and I don't want to throw things out. Can I ask another question? I'm sorry, Rachel said, but I'm
Oh,
just
yes,
so
please.
curious about what Whitney's doing. I'm working actually right now in my private work. I have my own consultancy. I'm working with a major automotive brand to evaluate their presence at automotive trade shows, car shows, basically. And one of the most frustrating things that I'm finding is those organizers do not share data with their sponsors. They don't tell us how many people go. They don't tell us demographics. They don't tell us buying behaviors. It's such a gap. And I just can't believe they can get away with it, if I'm honest with you, and still sell those sponsorships. Out of curiosity, what data do you share with your sponsors when you're trying to sell a sponsorship to a new one or with your partner base? What are you telling them?
Well, that's part of that balance that we were talking about at the beginning. So we don't want to be creepy and weird for our audience. They don't want to feel like if they show up to our event and suddenly they're just going to be marketed to right and left. We get that. We want to be a pleasant experience at the same time. But we do also recognize, and one of the perspectives that I have in this role is that I used to work for industry. So I was with some of the bigger pharmaceutical companies. I used to exhibit at VMX when it was called an ABC conference. So I have this perspective and I understand how important it is for a marketing team to be able to substantiate the revenue spend. And so we provide a balance of data. We provide enough data that would support the spend to their leadership teams without giving away private information for specific attendees. So, in general, we will provide demographics information. And depending on the sponsorship, some of it is easier to provide the data for than others. But if we have an event or a like an entertainment event or an education session where we can badge scan, we will provide a perspective on who were the people coming to this big event and then who came to see your booth, who came to your education session, but also came to your big sponsored entertainment event. And we provide just in general the demographics of were these people mostly female? Were they mostly straight out of practice? Were they mostly technicians? Were they veterinarians? So we can provide a good mix of data that gives them what they need to support the spend because they want to know are they getting in front of the right audiences and is their messaging impactful and is it driving people to their booth?
Interesting. I'm moving away in my practice from male, female, or gender designations. I'm trying to encourage people to not use that unless they have a specific product focused on a specific gender. I'm trying to get them away from that because I think it feels old school, if I may. You know what I mean?
Well, it could. The interesting fact in veterinary medicine is that about 80 to 85% of graduates are female. So,
Yeah.
in that regard, it is
Yeah.
kind of pointless to share male female. But some brands do care about it. So if they ask, we will share specifics. And we typically will ask, what do you need from this? What is your objective with sponsoring this giant concert? What do you need from this? And then that helps us to drive what kind of data we will pull. Some
Yeah.
companies really don't care about the gender, and you're right. That is not provided in every case, but if they need it, then we will provide it. And we have it. We collect it.
Yeah.
We also have, the question is not always male, female. So we have the
Other choices.
a
Yeah.
way that's more inclusive. Yeah.
I often work with technology companies and it's such a male dominated field that I do in those cases say to them, let's try and get some more women into this. And so we do want to evaluate whether or not we were successful because I'd love to see a better balance, gender balance with tech.
Yeah. So as far as the objectives, sounds like it's a conversation. It sounds like you allow, there's a sort of an advisory component with some of the biggest sort of voices and spenders, involved in the event. What about when it comes down to helping the exhibitors uh satisfy their objectives better? I think that there is a thought process of like, okay, well, it's up to you to bring it. to have your own strategy to make the best use of your time on the floor. But
Mhm.
I do hear that a lot of shows are providing better guidance, recommendations. I find the thematics at VMX are incredible and really allow the exhibitors to capitalize on that and figure out, okay, how can I take this and create a strategy for that data on the show floor? So where does that kind of come into the play? How do you guide the exhibitors in a way that helps them accomplish what they need to on the floor?
Yeah, and going back to the theme, that is one of the things I look forward to every year is finding out from our marketing team what the theme is going to be so that we can make adjustments with sponsorships and opportunities to help mesh up to that theme. And this year we're having a lot of fun because it's kind of a shout out to the Winter Olympics without saying the word Olympics. We are VMX World Classic this year, and everything has this Olympics champions type theme to it. The Champions of Care is another underlying theme. And so we'll probably see a lot of Olympics kind of related efforts in the expo hall. But one of the things that we do each year, we offer a service to especially new exhibitors or companies that have never been to VMX so that they can dial in and learn a little bit more about us. We provide a pretty robust package to them so that they understand the meeting and who our audience is. But Molly Hamill, who is our head of exhibit sales and operations, she does a really good job of planning each year for these types of dial in meetings where they can learn a little bit more, ask questions, and they have an opportunity to kind of learn a little bit more about what can we do in addition to just being a booth on the floor. And a lot of that is using the data, using the opportunity when people are coming to your booth. There are badge scanners. It's a great opportunity to capture attendee data. And we do have our registration set up in a way that our attendees do understand going booth to booth, allowing booths to scan your data. You're basically allowing them to reach back out to you. So we try to make sure that everybody's well aware of, the ways in which their data will be shared with our exhibitors. So we
Yeah.
try to lead and guide as best we can to encourage companies to spend time, send your best, send the people who are excited to talk to a lot of people during the day. Some of these booths are going to see several hundred people a day. Some of them are going to see several thousand, depending on the size of the booth. So be ready with your talking voices. We also try to encourage companies to rotate out their staff so that they have someone fresh, not exhausted by the end of the week.
Well, and the swag conversation is interesting, Dax, because I do know on this show floor, the swag is good. And so people are going to they will go through a data collection process to get that really good swag. In fact, John, we had a comment here from John who begs to differ. Dax, swag is the best part of events. I haven't had to buy a pen in over a decade, but I can tell you
Right.
it's not just pens they're giving away at the show. It's really good premium food
Mhm.
samples and that. So that's an incentive for the data, I think, is
Yeah.
the really, really good swag. And actually, I took a note from one of the stories we did on the show floor about the one way in, one way out booth design. And so there is a sort of in some booths a real forced path that begins with data and then ends with something really, really decent at the end. So a lot of interesting booth designs, I think, designed for strategic data collection at the show.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, in my experience, there's two philosophies around, let's call lead capture or badge scans. There's the quantity and there's the quality focus, and they both have merit. And so I've worked with companies where they are doing a giveaway or doing a food or drink or some kind of benefit to getting your badge scan, and they just get as many as they can get. They're scanning as many badges as possible. And then post event, they will look at all that data and say, all right, who are the qualified prospects within this huge data pool? I have no problem with that approach, but as long as we acknowledge that that is the approach, if that's what we're trying to do, is get as many scans as possible. The other is to do what's called selective attraction. And so that is to just try to attract qualified prospects into your exhibit and or to only scan people if they are a qualified lead or to at least qualify them at the moment of the scan so that you're doing some of that work in the booth and you're going to end up with a smaller amount of a smaller data pool but potentially a higher quality group of people. They both have merit and I think they're both reasons to do it. My only concern with the first approach is I find that some people go to trade shows just to get swag. And so they're bag fillers, and they're going booth to booth and fill their bag, fill their bag, fill their bag. And I just think we're wasting money on those people. I just do. I mean, I love it that that's what they're getting out of it, but they're not really creating value to exhibitors. Yeah, and so
Mhm.
that's where I'm really careful about what kind of swag strategy I've got.
And actually, I'm thinking about Whitney, the conversation at the beginning about balancing the expo floor with that kind of an objective. It's really good swag with education and having sort of additional content and interesting content experiences too. And to be fair, there's some shows that I would go to that I would consider really good content or an exclusive one-on-one with somebody, something I would scan my batch for sure. Yeah.
Well, and our audience loves to learn. I mean, they really do. Veterinarians and technicians, they're there to sponge learn. And so the booths that do have an educational component inside, those are the busier booths. They really do attract a lot of traffic because there's something else to learn. Companies that are launching new products, we try to find out early on the companies that are launching new brands and new products because that is something that they can really capitalize on with our event being the first one of the year. So they could potentially sponsor an educational session, but then we could then provide post event, who are your real qualified leads? We don't necessarily give email data out or too personal of data, but we will match up anyone who came to a session, but also to the booth. And that's a real qualified lead for that company sponsoring the educational session because it's somebody who's
Yeah,
interested.
I think it's an insight that goes beyond the veterinary industry, which is, and is a good lesson for exhibitors that people do come to these events to learn something new that they're going to bring back to their team, to their professional development. And so, how do you construct part of your experience to kind of give knowledge? I think that's a very interesting way to think about exhibiting. It's much less about us and our products and sales, and much more about the value that we're trying to deliver to those visitors to our exhibits. It's
Mhm.
good.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about surveying feedback from top exhibitors and sponsors. We've talked about exhibitors and their strategies for data. Love to talk a little bit about tools that are fueling better measurement that you're seeing, whether at your show or beyond, frankly. And then I'm also curious to touch on how much of data now is are you preloading or pre-show managing versus post-show managing? So we'll start with maybe tools that you're seeing out there first, and then we'll talk about, is this a pre-show, more of a heavily pre-show experience or post-show? That makes sense.
Yeah. So for the tools, I mean, we've looked at a bunch of different types of tools to provide ROI. I mean, there's AI tools out there that measure sentiment as you walk by signage, and that can be really costly. And we're a nonprofit as well. So we looked into offering something like that and then decided it really wasn't going to bring enough value at the time. It's something we of course will look at again and we'll keep it on our radar, but for that particular time it was something we kind of passed over. We use scan data. So our most efficient tool is the registration process. So we do collect demographics data as people are registering. So that's what we're preloading for the show is basically who is going to be at our event. We're able to keep track of that data because anywhere that person goes, anytime they attend anything, that same data follows them around on their badge. So the badge scanning is one of our most robust data collection tools that we have at our event. So there's also opportunity for the badge tapping and that type of stuff as well. But for the most part, attendees at our event have to either scan in or self check in to keep record of their continuing education, and that is for the requirement of their licensure. So that's a benefit to us that it's almost required of them to provide this data throughout the event. We match it up with booth scan data too, so we use a different company than we use. Actually, that's not true. This year we're mashing it up, but we also have the badge scan data and we will use those two data collection pools. And we work with my team specifically for sponsorships. We work with a consultant who helps us to kind of package up all of this data into a nice dashboard. And so that was one of the tools that I was going to mention that works for us. And it works really well for us to help provide that ROI support to the companies that need it. We put together this really nice dashboard that explains who the audience is, the demographics of the event, what were the most attended topics, what were the topics that were driving the most people into those sessions. And it's a wide range, but it's interesting to look at. And it's data that we can pull for, especially the education sponsors, so that they know what is driving people to go to sessions. It may not be fleas anymore. It might be something else. So we provide those dashboards as soon after the event as possible. So not necessarily the tool itself, but the strategy is to provide the data as complete as possible, as quickly as possible, because driving those conversations into the practice and continuing what the learners are hearing at our event versus the companies have large sales forces that they will send back into practices to help continue the conversations around these brands and these products. That's the most important thing. And that's what's really beneficial to the company sponsoring, especially at a higher level, to have that continuity in the practices for their sales teams. So that's a strategy that we've used.
Yeah. Analysis is a pain point. I mean, you can get all the, you can hand over the data, but if it's not delivered in a way that's easily digestible and
Mhm.
actionable, I think that's a real struggle for event marketers. So, yeah.
And it's taken some time. I mean, we've tweaked the reports over the years. The dashboards have looked different year to year, but I think we have found a nice dashboard that works and makes sense. It's easy to read and it's easy to understand and it's easy to deliver. I shouldn't
Yeah.
say easy. Marissa
Yeah.
listens, she'd probably say, wait a minute. But it takes some time for her, but she does a great job and it looks great and it's easy to read.
Yeah. Dax, any tools that you're seeing out there that's interesting? I mean, is AI, is it worthy of our attention?
AI is very broad in the things that it can do. I'll speak specifically about AI for a second and then go into the tools that I'm using on a regular basis. I recently did an event where we needed to construct a survey, and I write surveys all the time, but I decided to consult with our AI friend and see what they would come up with for survey questions. And they were great. I'm sorry, they were better than I would have done on my own. And so I do think, in the way that we use AI to help us sometimes write with clarity, AI can be a great way to construct the right questions and help you, work collaboratively to good questions. On the flip side of that, there's AI data analysis. So let's say, for example, can you hear me okay? I know I'm cutting in and out a little bit.
Your
Yeah.
your video stalls a few times while you're
Okay.
talking, but the sound is just fine. For all of you
Okay,
viewing,
that's good.
see it too. It's okay.
Yeah. So one of the things that you all of us have seen like a word cloud, essentially. And a word cloud essentially is like an AI analysis of open-ended verbatim questions in a survey that will elevate the words or phrases that are said the most. I don't use that. And the reason I don't is because I don't find AI can analyze those kind of human comments in the same way that I can as another human being. And so I was just doing this today, literally. I'm working on a report right now. I read 1,000 comments today, and I extracted from those comments, let's call it the 100 or the 75 that I thought were the most interesting and useful. And it wasn't based on which words rose to the top or which were the most common phrases. It was, oh, this is something that I think is going to be interesting to the team. I'm going to elevate this comment from one person. And the AI is not going to do that. They're just not going to know, as I do, what we're trying to accomplish, what is the context, what are the goals, what are interesting things that people are saying. And so I am hesitant to use AI for that. And I'm also, as Whitney hinted at, slightly hesitant to use AI for facial analysis, sensing of emotion. And that primarily is because I think people express emotions in many different ways. And I worry that the AI is only looking at one way that people express emotions. Maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like it almost is too broad a brush to get to what really is useful. Now, a relevant tool is observation. So I sometimes will go to an event from a measurement standpoint as an observer. I have no role at the event except to watch. And so I'm watching the audience, I'm observing what's happening. And listen, I've been working in events for 25 years, so I kind of know when something's working and when something isn't working. Take a lot of notes. And then I find in the reporting, well, I'll have quantitative data from surveys and other means. That little extra context from observation can be super helpful to deepen the analysis. And so it's a tool in a way that seems so obvious, but often we don't have that single person or a responsibility to say, all right, part of your role even is to be an observer of this. I did a project where I mystery shopped also, where I pretended, not in a bad way, but I just didn't tell them that I was working for the company. I went through the space and I had the full experience, as an attendee. Another tool, an obvious one, is surveys. And I am a believer in surveys, even though they can be imperfect. It's the only way that I know to understand what people feel about a brand, for example, is to ask them about what kinds of things what words do you associate with this brand, for example. And what I like to do with surveys, if possible, from an organizer standpoint, is do a pre and post. So in registration, I'll ask a brand question and I'll ask exactly the same brand question at the end, because I want to show my stakeholders, like, here's how we move the needle on brand, because I've asked the same question before and after. I like to ask about potential buying behavior. So I want to understand, like, how is this experience impacting people's likelihood to purchase or to come to the event again or or to recommend it to others, whatever it might be. Specific behaviors that we're trying to elicit with the experience, and ask people about that. So surveys, I am a big believer in. And I also am trying to do more in the moment polls. So like a quick pulse check. Someone's just finished a session or they just finished an activity. Can I ask one question? How would you rate the value of this, 1 to 5 stars? Whether it's on their mobile device or it's a QR code or whatever it might be, like, can I get that instantaneous reaction to how the quality of the experience they just had? I like doing that in the moment and not putting tons of questions in the post-event survey about everything that happened at the event, which no one remembers anyway. So I want to get it in the moment. And then the two other things quickly. One is the measurement of sustainability. I'm still a huge proponent of, despite whatever political stuff is going on in the world. And so I'm using tools to track carbon footprint and landfill waste. Those are the two big ones for me. So energy usage, carbon output, and the amount of landfill waste versus recycling or reuse or reduction strategies. And I think that any organizer who's trying to sell an event to people who care about this stuff, as you said, what your audience does, should be tracking those two data points at least. And then the last one, and getting a little bit more experimental, is I've been using scanners to track people's movement through environments. These are passive scanners. Whitney, I know, is capturing batch scans at the moment of entry. That's not always possible for every event, or it's not preferable for some events.
Mhm.
And certainly if you're an exhibitor, so I'm working with a very large exhibitor right now, we're putting scans in their booth, scanners in the booth, to track what people are doing, how many people come, what they're spending time doing, what their journeys are. And I find that those performance data points very, very interesting. I will say, last point on this is I'm not looking for people to spend more time. I'm looking for them to spend the right amount of time. So as an example, if we're demonstrating a product in the booth, I might want that product to optimally be a 7-minute long experience. I don't necessarily want the visitor to spend an hour dominating the product specialist or the brand person. When we want, as we said earlier, more people to come through, more throughput, more scans, more high quality prospects. So I want them to spend 7 minutes, and I want to track, are they spending that 7 minutes? It's no good if they're spending 30 seconds, and it's no good if they're spending 30 minutes. So I'm not a proponent of more time is better, but I am looking at what is the right amount of time for people to spend within an experience to give it that optimal impact. So that's what I'm using in my tool set.
Yeah. Yeah, heat maps are especially interesting. I know when I was at CES last year and we're gearing up for the show, real-time changes were being made on the fly thanks to the heat mapping. And okay, let's move this. It's not, we really wanted people to see this and they're not getting to it. Let's move some things around this
Yeah.
evening, see if that helps. Very interesting stuff.
I'm doing, sorry, one last thing, but I was just doing a big consumer activation, and we had surveys that were happening in the activation. So we had people with tablets asking questions of the people who were in the activation. This was a week-long activation, and we were looking at the data every day, Rachel, and making decisions about what to do the next day based on the survey data from that day. So that is another great way to use data, is this sort of live optimization. So I'm all for it.
Yeah. I like what you said too about the facial recognition because I tend to have a scrunched, serious face when I'm really paying attention, which could be translated into I'm not having a good time, but I am.
If I'm in a session, sometimes I will be playing a game on my phone because I like to listen,
Yeah.
and I have to kind of occupy my eyes and my fingers to listen better. And the facial recognition is going to think, well, this person's obviously ignoring the content he's on his phone, but I'm not. I'm actually more intently listening.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good. I mean, this is I feel like we could go for another half an hour, but we won't because it's just so interesting. There's so much to dig into. And Whitney, really appreciate your time and good luck with the upcoming show. And
Thank you.
theme. Very excited to see how that plays out on the floor. And thanks as always, Dax, for your insight and partnership. And again, if you're a member of the EMMC or you want to learn more event measurement, and again, they are putting out some guidance for event organizers. So look out for that news. And thanks for tuning in. Appreciate everybody. Thank you so much, Whitney. Thanks, Dax.
Thank you.